I just started recording, so we'll cut out the unnecessary parts and stuff.
Right.
Let me see. Okay. I'm ready to get started. How are things on your end?
It's fine. I'm ready to go.
Okay. Fantastic. So, hi everyone. We have Donald Stephenson here. Donald, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. And why don't we start off by you introducing yourself?
Sure, Alex. To begin with, I've recently retired from a 36-year career in the automotive industry. My experience spreads across several brands from Ford and BMW through Lexus, Toyota, Audi, and Volkswagen, where I retired as a senior vice president of after sales at the end of 2017. During that time, I've held positions in field leadership and corporate leadership, and I've seen and experienced a great deal in the automotive industry. So that's essentially been my life for the past 36 years. I'm a father of 3, married. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I retired to now, where I work as a automotive consultant.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, that's. I know you have a very extensive background in automotive, and I mean everything that you've done is very impressive. I know you have a lot to contribute to the team, which is, and actually, why did you decide to join the team? To join the.
Sure. I was aware of blockchain and what it was moving towards in terms of possibly interrupting the finance industry. And I thought, looking through the variables or the aspects of blockchain, a decentralized database or ledger sheet where data could be freely shared, verified, secured. What struck me there as a real breakthrough is that the transparency and the sharing of the data is something that you don't see a lot in the automotive industry. The automotive industry is a long supply chain of several touch points, from the manufacturing process to the delivery, to the marshaling yard, to dispatch to the dealer and retailing to the customer, and then it falls off with very little visibility to what happens to the car after it's sold. The second, the third owner, does it go, how many times does it go through the auction? How many times does it get resold? What's the impact on all those actions on the residual value? And all of that happening before the car is subsequently scrapped. Well, one of the big questions in the automotive industry has always been what's happening in the customer journey with their vehicle. And a lot of that information is, gathered up through focus groups, it's gathered up through third-party intelligence and data gathering services that sell it back to the OEMs. It's gathered from the retailers, the dealers themselves, and what they talk to their customers about. But there's no end-to-end management of data that, say the banks have on their customers. They follow them fairly closely, and with blockchain, they'll be able to follow them even closer, probably with fewer middlemen in the middle and fewer touch points. And quite honestly, I think with less cost. So with blockchain, I saw 2 applications, one on the manufacturing through the dealer side. And that's not only on vehicles, but it's on parts as well. We used to joke that it was easier to know when your pizza was going to arrive at your house than when your car would get into the dealership. And that also applies to parts. If you have a car down because of an unavailability of parts, you have an idea of when it might get into the dealership. But meanwhile, you have a very upset customer on the other hand, wondering, What do you mean you don't know when you're going to get the part in? You have to tell me 3, 4 days out, maybe 5. So those are areas where I think the greater data transparency would be a real help. And on the customer side, I could see the similar application, assuming the data could be captured through the customer's lifetime ownership of the car, or of the car passing through several customer hands, to give feedback to the OEMs, to the dealers, on what the life journey of that car might be. I could see that being very useful for marketing purposes, leasing and finance, after sales uses. Because right now, I think everybody's sort of following that old J.C. Penney rule of market spending. They know half the money's being wasted, they just don't know which half. But here, having data and being able to see from one end of the pipeline to the other, I think that would be invaluable if that point could ever be achieved.
Okay.
So that's where I came from as far as my interest in blockchain. And as far as the connection to the VinChain, I saw it as an opportunity to learn more about the process.
Yeah. So basically, the data is scattered throughout many different repositories, and there's no common thread to unite all of them. For multiple reasons, the disadvantages of centralized databases. But basically, VinChain is the common thread that ties all of these different repositories together. And so that's basically why you decided to join the team, because you would like to learn more about this technology and participate in the revolutionizing of the automotive industry. So
Definitely.
So what macro trends are you seeing in the industry? Everybody knows that automotive is going to change, because of blockchain technology, but what are these changes that seem to loom on the horizon? Give us your bird's eye view of what do you think is going to happen within the next, 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think the most basic change that not only OEMs, but also dealers have embraced more so now than, say, 10 years ago, is the capture, the management, and the use of big data. And this not only applies on the OEM side, when you're talking about aggregated data in millions of units, but I think it applies equally on the customer side. Dialing in closer to customer demands and expectations on vehicle delivery and service. And in the past, I think the focus had typically been, there's a lot of resources and a lot of focus to sell a car, either wholesaling to the dealer and subsequently the dealer to the customer. That was your typical automotive model that's been around for 100 years. And there wasn't much thought given after the fact. The car might find its way back up in the secondary market, wind up on a used car lot. But, there's a lot of missing or gaps into what was happening during that time. So I think now, as I said, both dealers and OEMs understand that managing your data is not only a means of improving your retail success, but also in retaining your customers, getting closer to your customers to know what they expect from you so you can meet those expectations, because they certainly will hang around you if you don't. I think for the manufacturers, it also comes into figuring out what product may be needed for the future. Trim levels, grade interiors, horsepowers, powertrains, power plants. I think it all, more data coming back in, the more it's aggregated and sliced and verified, the more useful it can be in driving good business decisions into the future. And I think that's going to be more important than it was 10 years ago for the following reasons. One, we all know about the electric cars. It sort of got everybody up on their heels, wondering just how much of the industry that it's going to take over. There's big question marks if customers are really going to buy them, or are they just going to be an urban vehicle? I don't think anybody really knows. But if you look at the number of cars Tesla has sold, and you look at the other makes that are coming along, you realize it's just a matter of time before the hurdles of range anxiety, charging stations, and the like are overcome. And then if the pricing is brought down to a level that some manufacturers are trying to achieve now, like Tesla with the Model 3 and then Volvo with their car, those hurdles could come down very quickly. The flip side of that is those vehicles need less maintenance. They'll see the dealership less frequently for service. Coming right behind electricity is hydrogen fuel decks. Toyota's working on this, and to many, since the end product is water vapor, sort of trumps electrical cars. So from the minimizing your carbon footprint. So you've got all these powertrains that are changing. They're going to have an impact on the future. Secondly, you've got shared ownership. Now that could be within a household. It could be between homes that's coming down the road. You've got self-driving cars, which I think will probably make its first impact, in the Uber and Lyft businesses. But I also think this probably technology-wise further out in some of the others, but it's definitely going to have an impact. So all of these changes, and they're pretty exciting, have gotten a lot of people predicting that the future for the car industry is sort of gloomy. There's been anecdotal stories thrown out there for so-called people of knowledge in the industry that you're going to see fewer dealers with dealer consolidation. You're going to see fewer OEMs. That may well come about. I don't have a crystal ball to know. One thing I believe is that the OEM dealer model as it exists now is going to change. Is going to have to. Because if you factor in all of those paradigm shifts in the industry, they're ostensibly going to make an impact on sales, service, and margins for the OEMs and also for the dealers. One thing I didn't point out that's really picking up a lot of steam right now that has a direct impact on sales, and that's subscription services. Porsche, Mercedes have rolled them out. Volvo has rolled out one for $600 a month, where you can change out of cars so many times a year. That has a lot of appeal. And I could see if the cost is brought down to where it's comparable to maybe somewhat inflated lease payment, where that could become quite the trend. So all of these things, I believe, will have an impact on the business. And I think it will go so deep as to change the footprint of the dealerships, because you may not need these huge, 20-acre, 15-acre sites anymore, because you may not need that inventory. You may need to have your dealerships located in more highly trafficked areas and do the service somewhere off separately, because the service may be coming down versus what it intended to be with the internal combustion engine. So there's a lot of changes on the horizon. And I think it's going to be incumbent on both the OEM and the dealer to better manage their businesses than they have before. And I think the data sharing, the transparency of data, as I mentioned before, from end to end of the pipeline, is going to become more important now than it ever has been in history, if to help both the OEM and the dealers traverse this very rocky road we got ahead of us.
Yeah, data is basically modern day gold. So yeah, you mentioned a lot of really interesting things just now. The front of electrical engines. Actually, I wasn't aware of the hydro powered engines. That's very, very interesting. Engines powered by vapor, basically by water.
Well, it's hydrogen converting to electricity. Mm-hmm. So, and there are companies. I know Toyota was working on it 20 plus years ago. So it has a pretty long gestation cycle, if you will. Electric cars really aren't anything new. Some of the first cars ever rolled off the assembly line were electric cars, but they didn't last too long. It got overcome by the gas engine, but a little bit of history. But the hydrogen fuel decks, don't have a footprint back to a power plant, and whether that power plant is running off coal, natural gas, or whatever. It has its own challenges too. You're going to have issues of installation. Where do you gas up? But one of the upsides of hydrogen is that you could refuel a hydrogen tank in probably less than 10 minutes, and versus 6-hour charge for an electrical car. So there's pros and cons both ways. So we'll see which comes out. I can imagine 10 years from now that the customer fleet of an average dealership could consist of, internal combustion cars, maybe for heavy trucks, electrical, maybe some hydrogen. Who knows? The market will decide what it likes in time. And I think that's probably one of the things OEMs are struggling with. How much of the resources are they going to bet on this technology versus the other? So that's a very interesting time.
Of all of the possibly changing business models, how you mentioned the relationship between OEMs and dealers is changing, and as the markets shift, so we're seeing a front in electrical vehicles. We're seeing shared mobility. We're seeing autonomous vehicles, and the combination of all of these things combined with blockchain, that's kind of like the glue between all of these things, really is going to transform those relationships. So what would, or at least, what is your hypothesis? What would a relationship like that look like? So you mentioned, a smaller inventory for dealers, but what else would really shift? You mentioned dealers possibly being in a more high traffic location and doing service somewhere else. But do you see any other possible shifts with with OEM relationships with their dealers, or do you see OEMs potentially even selling directly to consumers?
Well, I'll take your last question first. I have a hard time seeing that, given the dealer franchise laws in pretty much all the states, which prohibit manufacturers from selling directly to the consumer. And if Elon Musk's efforts with Tesla is any indication, it doesn't look like that will change anytime in the immediate future. It could. I mean, as I said earlier, I don't have a crystal ball, and who knows what could be in place 10 years from now. I think where the blockchain application will have the greatest impact is on reducing the number of touch points between the development or the build of a given vehicle and delivery to the customer. I think the impact on the OEM to dealer side is more operational. Fewer touch points, greater data sharing, less guessing, fewer third parties to verify data as it goes along the way, because that's primarily what's involved. Because at the end of the day, regardless of the powertrain changes and culture changes and what have you, the car business is still going to revolve around a simple process of delivering a car or service to a customer. It's going to involve registration. It's going to involve the receipt of funds, the checking of those funds. It's going to still involve service to some degree or not. It'll still involve some parts, even though electrical cars will have fewer parts to fail than, say, maybe an internal combustion engine. So that piece of the model will still be there. How that model gets executed going forward, I think, can be liberalized from the decades-old model it is now with better use and greater transparency of the data. Uh, that is really, I think, a very key point here. And since the data all hinges off a VIN number, I mean, think about it. The vehicle comes out of the factory, there's a VIN number. It's sold to a dealer, there's a VIN number. To the customer, a VIN number. The customer registers the car, there's a VIN number. The customer gets his license plate, it's attached in some states to a VIN number. The only common thread through all of those entities is the VIN number. So if you're able to track that VIN number through a blockchain application from an OEM to dealer to customer, and then maybe idealistically track that VIN number through customer ownership. You know, how many times he's been in for service, how many times he bought accessories for the car, has the car been damaged, has it been sold, was it caught in a hurricane down in Florida and flooded. I mean, all that information becomes valuable back to the reseller, to consequent customers. So I see to a good degree, aside from the data transparency, is maybe customers become more empowered in the car buying and ownership process than maybe they've been in the past. Because with the transparency of this data, and assuming they have visibility to it as well, they'll know if a secondhand car they're buying off a used car lot is good or not. A dealer who will be buying a car in or taking it in on trade will know if they should allow more money for this car than they would for one just like it 3 weeks ago, because it's been maintained, it's been serviced, it hasn't been in an accident. All of that data coming through, I think, will drive more informed decisions, whether it's the manufacturer, the dealer, or the customer.
So why do you think VinChain is the right solution to be that common thread? You know, to basically be that unifying, VIN identification number all throughout the customer journey.
So give me that again, please. I'm sorry.
So basically, why do you think VinChain is the right solution?
Well, because VinChain works off the most common denominator through all those processes, which is a VIN number itself. And if it can not only track the VIN number, but also add to it the additional touch points. For instance, on a car it's been on a second or third owner, it could have been through the auction and bought in by a dealer and resold once, maybe 2 times. It could have been wholesaled out of Texas into Tennessee after floating through a flood in Houston. So the visibility of that data on a car, I think, will remove a lot of risk and doubt in terms of the value of that car. I mean, quite honestly, if you go to the typical used car lot at a dealership, unless the vehicle was bought and turned back in at that dealership, they really don't know the history on it. You know, many dealers buy cars from auctions, and they'll travel around the country and buy cars, and the auctions will freight the cars by truck back to the dealerships. They'll inspect the car, they'll recon the car, but there'll always be a gap on what they really know about it. I mean, they really do do as well as they can to represent a good product to their customers. What I'm saying is that through VinChain and the blockchain application, any doubts about that car, any guessing, did this car come out of Florida and did it get out before the hurricanes hit in September, for instance? Was this car up in New York, in which case, it was exposed to salt and rust during the winter months? There are reports out there that give you some of this information, but there's still a lot of gaps because there's no tracking. There's just, volunteering of information. So I see not only the information base on a given vehicle improving, but the quality and integrity of that information improving substantially. And that's really, at the end of the day, is what people are making their decisions on. How much am I going to buy that car for? And if it's been maintained and upkept and kept up, and it's going to be worth more to me as a buyer than one over there that it thinks a black box.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly how you said, everything, all of the information is really scattered, and it really
Yeah.
it comes down to blockchain technology to be able to unify that in a very trustworthy way. Because previously, just we there were attempts to do something along those lines, but it was not there. The
Yeah.
blockchain technology was not there, and it couldn't really be done. And so the only thing that was left to do are modern day, vehicle history reporting companies that still get little pieces of data from, all over the place and try to, do their best to present them the most comprehensive history, but they're still limited. There's still a ceiling to it, and blockchain just basically breaks through that ceiling.
Yeah, I think, now I'll give you a real world example. The state laws involving vehicle titling differ. In some states, I won't call them out by name, you could actually, or used to, take two halves of the same model vehicle and weld it together and sell it as a car with no branding on the title. Uh, if you end up buying that car, say it was done in one state and you bought it in the next state over, you might not be too happy with the problems you may have with it down the road. Title branding is an issue all over the country. It's an issue when a customer in that car pulls up into a dealership for what he thinks is work's going to be covered under warranty, only to find out that the warranty's been previously denied because the car was in a flood or some other issue that disqualified the car. Then who gets burned? The customer gets burned, the dealer gets burned who may have done the work on the car and then submits the warranty claim. So having this information will, I think, take a lot of the guesswork out of the business and probably save OEMs, dealers, and customers not only a lot of money, but probably create a lot of goodwill.
Yeah, because it's having that transparency that what you said, it's really what it comes down to is the quality of the information that you have. And that's really where what we base all of our decisions on. If we have trustworthy data, if we have enough data, we could make more accurate decisions and, basically be more confident in ourselves that we are making the best decision. So I believe one of the previous times when we spoke, you mentioned, what's worth more to you? It's if you have two identical cars, but one of them you have no information on, and another car that you have guaranteed information on. Well, even if this guaranteed information is slightly spotty, it could have maybe like some small mishaps. This is still worth more than not knowing anything. And that's really what all of this comes down to. It's just having a better system for having to provide higher quality and more transparent information.
Yeah, and that's just on the customer side. There's similar advantages for the dealer whose used car manager is out there buying cars to put and sell on his lot. He doesn't want to buy lemons. If a car, for instance, has been coming out of Florida and it's been bought back in because of the three strikes law, the lemon law, he may not be aware of that. He may not want to buy that car, in which case the car's value gets marked down. Somebody may buy it, but at least the car is disclosed. Information is known. So there's advantages for the dealer, and there's also advantages for the OEM because, they don't want to create customer dissatisfaction by turning down a claim on a car that has a branded title. But the customer wasn't aware of it because there was nowhere to be not shown. The dealer wasn't aware of it. And maybe the only one knew about it was the OEM because they bought the car back and branded it 3 states away. But it made its way through the auction chain back to that dealer's lot. And boom, you got a problem.
Yeah.
So that's just one example where I think, the transparency of information will come in. And I think it'll put a dose of honesty and probably some shady practices that are out there that happen on certain car lots. I don't think in most franchise car lots, but the value creation through the accuracy of the information, the surety of it, the honesty, if you will. I don't know how to really put a percentage or a dollar figure on that, But I think it'll go well past more than just being a peace of mind for the customer. I think it can become a real marketing advantage for that dealer and even for the OEM. Because remember, most OEMs have used car programs. They have certified pre-owned programs. I was involved in one of the first ones they had launched in the industry. And they put resources out there to help dealers sell their used cars, finance assistance, incentives, and the like. They certainly don't want to be putting that money behind issues or cars that are going to cause them issues down the road.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
So yeah, honestly, thank you so much for all of this information, and of
sure.
course, insights are always invaluable. And no one that I've really spoken to really has like this both perspectives of the the automotive side, both the customer side, the dealer side, the OEM side, and you're a perfect combination of all of this with over 30 years of experience in this industry. So honestly, I thank you so much for one, for this interview, and two, for being part of the team.
Sure.
I really appreciate it, and thank you.
Certainly, Alec.
All right, well, thank you so much, Don. We'll talk next time.
Okay.